What up, gang? Carolina Jackpot coming at you August 19th, 2023. We are officially 7 days away from the start of the college football season. Now, I know most of your teams aren't playing this coming Saturday. Most everybody's going to start the next Saturday or Thursday, just like mine. But toe is going to meet leather. 7 games around the country this coming Saturday. And, well, actually, one is not in this country. One of them is going to be in Ireland. Notre Dame versus Navy. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are looking forward to the 2023 college football season as much as I am. When you are done watching this video, or even while you're watching this video, if you don't mind me asking, hit the thumbs up button if you enjoy the content here. It really helps Carolina Jackpots videos get pushed out to the masses, to the YouTube audience as a whole. And subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already, if you wouldn't mind. College football content comes your way here all year long, and the live streams that we have on this channel are priceless. We're going to have a really good time doing that this year, and I'm looking forward to it. We're going to go over the 2023 Gamecocks. You're going to find out as much as you can about them from me, offensively, defensively, coaches, miscellaneous stuff. Give you a little bit of research I've done, but I'm going to put most of my time into breaking down the schedule and how I think that the games are going to go. We're going to pick a winner and a loser for each one of those games. I don't do any, this is a toss-up, so I don't know stuff here. I'm going to give you a game-by-game prediction, and I'm going to give you official record for the Gamecocks at the end of 2023. So let's get right on into it. 2022 was kind of a mixed bag for South Carolina. Ended up with a record of 8-5. If you polled anybody before the start of the season, I don't think that they would have told you that was going to be the record at the end of the year. Ended up with a bowl loss to Notre Dame. South Carolina sat there at 6-4, going into a game at home against Tennessee in the second to last week of the regular season. I had just come off of a very, very disappointing showing on the road at Florida. South Carolina lost 38-6 to a very mediocre Florida team, and it looked like we were destined for a 6-6 record to end the season. Famously, I denounced my fandom after the Florida game until changes were made, and lo and behold, changes were made before the Tennessee game. Offensive coordinator Marcus Satterfield was relieved of his play-calling duties, although he was still officially the offensive coordinator. Anyone that had a set of eyeballs could see that he was no longer calling plays for the team. They exploded for 63 points against I believe they were ranked number 5 at the time, Tennessee team. And as a 21 or 22-point underdog, South Carolina won 63-38 at home. The next week they went on the road against Clemson, also a top 10 team, as a double-digit underdog. Again, South Carolina falls behind by 14 points in the first half of that game. Clemson was aided by Spencer Rattler through a pick 6 and also a safety. South Carolina somehow, though, finds a way to come from 14 points down in the second half against a team that had I believe it was like a 40-game home winning streak. Clemson had not lost at home since they lost to Pitt back in 2016, late in the season. South Carolina wins that game 31-30. Shane Beamer wins his first Palmetto Bowl and caps off an 8-4 regular season. That victory, in the grand scheme of things, to Carolina Jackpot, that victory was more impressive than the Tennessee victory. Number one, because it was against an arch rival, your arch rival. Yes, Tennessee is a conference foe, and they are a rival of sorts, but not like Clemson. And Clemson winning at home the past 10 years, give or take, has pretty much been automatic. It's pretty much been Clemson could take the schedule and pencil in the wins. South Carolina did the unthinkable that day. That was a heck of a performance in all facets of the game, especially in the second half. And credit to Shane Beamer and his coaching staff for pulling that thing out. It was really nothing short of miraculous, if you want to know the absolute truth about it. So we talked about Marcus Satterfield. Was signed to a 2-year contract. Not really Shane Beamer's first choice as offensive coordinator. He actually retained Mike Bobo from the outgoing Will Muschamp staff when he came in December of 2020. Mike Bobo was supposed to be a holdover, kind of to bridge the gap between the new coaching staff and the old. However, he chose to take a job on Brian Harson's staff at Auburn, and he left South Carolina without really giving Shane Beamer much of a notice. And Shane Beamer was forced to hire quickly. And most of the time when you make a rushed hire, things don't work out very well. Well, that's exactly what happened. Marcus Satterfield didn't have a lot of experience as an offensive coordinator. I think he had a cup of coffee at Temple when they were coached by Matt Rule, who had some good teams there, by the way. We didn't enjoy the same success under Satterfield that Temple did under Satterfield with Matt Rule as the head coach. Offenses were very vanilla, very predictable, really didn't seem to utilize the best players on the field at the most opportune times. And by the end of the 2022 season, around the time he was relieved of play calling duties, I would say 95% of the Gamecock fan base was absolutely sick of the guy. So his contract ran out, wasn't renewed. He rejoins his buddy Matt Rule in Lincoln, Nebraska with the Cornhuskers. In comes the new offensive coordinator, Dowell Loggins, a guy who I affectionately nicknamed Rudy Bob as soon as I saw him. Number one, because of his short stature. Number two, he played quarterback, about fifth-string quarterback at Arkansas back in the late 90s, early 2000s when Houston Nutt was there. He's actually coming over from Arkansas, where he's been coaching tight ends for Sam Pittman for the past couple of years. Prior to that, he was an offensive coordinator in the NFL. He had several different stops. He was with the Jets, the Dolphins, the Bears, the Titans. Didn't enjoy a lot of success, really didn't enjoy any success in the NFL. He was actually named in an article as the NFL's worst offensive coordinator. The thing about it is, for some reason, the guy kept getting jobs. And that's puzzling to me. If he was that horrible, why did head coaches in the NFL continue to want this guy to come be the offensive coordinator for them? Why did general managers in the NFL continue to hire him? He must have had an upside somewhere. Hopefully we'll see that upside come out this year. He's going to run more of a pro-style attack than what we saw with Marcus Satterfield. The playbook that he has, from everything that I have heard, is much simpler than what Marcus Satterfield had going on. Marcus Satterfield's playbook was very complex, very confusing from what I understand. Spencer Rattler seemed confused at times on the field last year. A lot of the players seemed to miss assignments, just totally whiff on blocks. It was bad. Last year actually looked worse at times than 2021 did. However, South Carolina actually scored more points per game last year, 32 points per game, which was an increase in 10 points per game from 2021. So they only scored 21 points a game, or 22 points a game in 2021. 21s and 22s, confused there. A scary statistic: they only rushed for 119 yards a game last year. That's the lowest in at least 7 years. Really, really bad. That ranked them in the 100s nationally as far as FBS teams go. So that stat is going to have to improve this year, and going to have to do so with the loss of last year's starting running back, Marshawn Lloyd, a guy who came in from the Washington, D.C., Maryland area with a lot of fanfare. He was class of 2020. everybody knows the story. He got injured on the first day of fall camp in 2020 in a non-contact drill. Tore his ACL, had to sit out the entire 2020 season. Probably a good season to have to sit out, quite honestly, if you were going to have to sit out a season, right? I mean, the season was abbreviated. A lot of things were just topsy-turvy then with the COVID stuff. Came back in 2021, looked kind of ginger all year long, really didn't have a great season. 2022, Marshawn looked the part in games where he was not injured, and he was injured a lot. He had a deep thigh bruise, which really hampered him through most of the second half of the season. I've heard conflicting stories that the week of the Florida game, maybe he and Christian Beal Smith, who's another running back who's no longer with the team, who's moved on, were in a bar in the 5 Points area of Columbia drinking beer while the team was down in Florida getting it ran in raw on them. Not a real good look if that's true. However, you're an adult, you can do what you want to do, but that's just something that's just not cool, in my opinion, and just doesn't reflect very well for the team and the culture of the team. Also, you've lost some pieces to the transfer portal there on the offensive side of the ball. Of course, tight end / hybrid player Jaheim Bell, who spent a lot of time running the football last year in the absence of Marshawn Lloyd, has gone. He was kind of whisked away by Mike Norvell to the Florida State program. Marshawn Lloyd has since transferred out to USC to play for Lincoln Riley. And you also lost tight end Austin Stogner, who came to South Carolina via the transfer portal last year, seemingly to play with Spencer Rattler. He's since transferred back to Oklahoma. The experiment with him really didn't go all that great. He was supposed to be a really key part of that offense, and things just didn't work out that great. We had a few bright moments, but overall, not a real good season for Stogner. It was actually overshadowed by the emergence of Nate Atkins, a transfer from East Tennessee State, an FCS school, who's the son of then offensive line coach Greg Atkins. And Greg Atkins has been known by me as the Fat Arn Anderson because of the resemblance he bears to the former grappler from NWA and WCW days. Was supposed to come in with a lot of fanfare too as a really good offensive line coach. Things just never really got going under him. He had some health issues that I really didn't know about, so I kind of felt bad about calling him the Fat Arn Anderson. He spent a lot of time away from the sidelines, and that job now belongs to Lonnie Teasley. Atkins has kind of remained with the team in kind of like an advisor role, but he's no longer an on-the-field coach for South Carolina. Spencer Rattler, quarterback, returns. This will be his fifth year. He spent 2020 and 2021 at Oklahoma. 2019, he was a freshman at Oklahoma. Didn't see a lot of action there. He was the starter in 2020. He had his best year, 38 touchdowns, I believe, and 5 interceptions. 2021, started out as the starter. Things got kind of rocky. He got benched in favor of the freshman Caleb Williams. And we all know how that story played out. Caleb Williams, the apple of head coach Lincoln Riley's eye, ended up transferring to Southern Cal with Lincoln Riley after the 2021 season. And Spencer Rattler really never saw any more action at Oklahoma after being benched. Famously, he kind of spoke his mind a little bit after being benched, had a little bit of a bad attitude about it, and when he came to South Carolina, chose the Gamecocks. Lots of folks thought that maybe he would be a cancer in the locker room, and had all these bad connotations with Spencer Rattler based on the way he handled himself after being benched in favor of Caleb Williams, and also the way he acted and carried himself on this Netflix show, QB1. I've never really seen it. He was on back in around 2017, I think, when he was in high school in Arizona. Acted kind of a diva, selfish, all this stuff. None of that has come to fruit in Columbia. He has been nothing but a positive influence in the locker room and on the field since he has come to South Carolina. Obviously, he's grown up a lot since all that stuff went down. So last year started out kind of rocky for him. Ended up with 18 touchdowns, 12 interceptions on the year. 138.7 QBR rating at the end of the year. That was not good. Comparable in the SEC, quarterback KJ Jefferson from Arkansas's QB rating for the year was 165.2. Missouri's Brady Cook, who is not a good quarterback, had a 133 QBR rating, which is just below Rattler's. And you take out the breakout game against Tennessee where he threw 6 touchdowns against 0 interceptions, that number would be significantly lower. However, the fact remains that game did exist, and he did do very well there. That's my counterpoint. When people are telling me how mediocre Spencer Rattler was, they say, well, if you take out the Tennessee game, well, you can't take out the Tennessee game. It was part of the season. It was part of the fabric of what he did last year. He has some weapons to work with on the outside. A wide receiver, Antoine Wells Jr., Juice, given his government name, 928 yards last year and 6 touchdowns. Seems like he caught a lot more touchdowns than that, had a lot more yards than that receiving. He did. He's a transfer from James Madison, came over after the 2021 season. Looking for some real big things from him this year. He is an all-conference type player. They also return Marion Brown, a guy who's been with the program for a couple of years. He transferred in from Georgia Tech. Xavier Leggett, 167 yards receiving last year, 3 touchdowns. He is a big-bodied type wide receiver. Guy is really thick. He's out of Mullins, South Carolina. Had a good showing last year in the bowl game against Notre Dame. They also add in a transfer wide receiver, Eddie Lewis, who comes over from Memphis. 615 yards last year receiving and 7 touchdowns. Memphis, which has been a pretty solid program in the AAC. Over at tight end, South Carolina lost all their scholarship tight ends from the 2022 season. Of course, with the transfer of Jaheim Bell, Austin Stogner transferred back out to Oklahoma, and Jaheim Bell transferred to Florida State. We already said that, didn't we? And Nate Atkins was out of eligibility. So what you do, you have to hit the transfer portal for that. South Carolina brings in Trey Knox, a transfer from Arkansas, took 5 touchdown catches last year. They also bring in Josh Simon, a transfer from Western Kentucky, who had 7 touchdown catches last year and was an all-conference USA selection. I think South Carolina will be okay at that position, which has become increasingly more and more important in college football, more and more coveted, and more coveted in the NFL. Things in college translate to the NFL. Things in NFL translate to college. Both of them kind of feed off of each other. It's right. So the next position group that I'm going to talk about, Dowell Loggins, of course, was the tight ends coach at Arkansas. So hopefully that bodes well for us over there. Nick Harbor is another very, very intriguing character on the offensive side of the football for South Carolina. We want to talk about the big 6'5" and up to now 245 pounder out of the Washington D.C. area, true freshman, played edge and tight end in high school, comes out as a 5-star. This guy has amazing speed. I've watched a lot of his high school film, even when we were, still recruiting him. He's an absolute monster, and I know that kind of thing gets thrown around a lot as cliche, and a lot of people get dubbed, oh, he's a monster, oh, he's a freak. This dude is a freak. He's going to be a problem for some defenses this year. He's going to make a mark this year. When? I'm not really sure, but rest assured, people are going to remember this guy's name for a long time. He looks really, really good, really mature, likes physicality, and looks every bit the part for South Carolina. this could be, this may be one of the biggest gets that we've gotten of all time. At running back, things don't look too rosy over there. We only return one player who has actually played in an SEC contest, that being Juju McDowell last year, rushed for 241 yards, 2 touchdowns. Not the most physical back, not the biggest back, not an every down back. A guy who honestly should be catching passes out of the backfield and getting out into space. He's 5'8", really small, not going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. South Carolina's moved 6th year senior Dakereon Joyner back to running back. This man has played running back. He's played wide receiver for South Carolina, and now he moves to the running back room. Just is a testament to really what a team player he is and how willing he is to help his teammates and how much he loves being a South Carolina Gamecock. Because, quite frankly, he has had offers from various other coaches at other schools to come play quarterback, to come play wide receiver for them, and he has chosen to stay at South Carolina. All through the coaching change, the transition from the Muschamp staff to the Beamer staff, been nothing but positive for the university. Probably will go down as one of my all-time favorite Gamecocks in history. How he's going to do this year all hinges on what's probably going to be a patchwork offensive line. And we talk about playing true freshmen. South Carolina has recruited really well at offensive line the past 2 cycles. Thing is, these guys probably aren't ready to make that transition to a starting role yet, or a role where they're going to see a lot of significant playing time. However, there's a first time for everything, and it may be time for some of that to happen. Of course, the high 4-star from over at the Dorman High School, Marquis Anderson, number 1 recruit in the state last year. South Carolina lands this guy. Maybe that's a part of your offensive line this year. Of course, they lost left tackle Jalen Nichols to injury in the spring game. When he's going to return, it's not really clear. He may be back at some point during the season. But, you lost a pretty good piece there. And make no mistake about it, Jalen Nichols was not an elite-level player. I wouldn't even say he was a really good offensive lineman. I would say he was above average slightly, leaning on good. However, the way that unit played last year, he was a superstar on that particular unit. And a big loss for South Carolina. And I'm not downplaying his injury. I'm just kind of referencing the point that it ain't going to take a lot to get in there and kind of match that production, because these guys have not performed this year. They bring in a transfer, Sidney Fugar, who comes in. Also, another young man, and is his name going to escape me right now? Nick Gargiulo, pronounce that correctly, out of Yale. And people are going to laugh and say, oh, well, he's from Yale. He's 6'5", well over 300-pounder. The guy's an animal. Listening to him during his press conference, he is extremely well-spoken and extremely intelligent. Talking, you can tell he's going to be someone. But that's to be expected from someone who came from Yale. He's a graduate student. You can't play as a graduate student at Yale. Yale only has 1 captain on their team a year. You don't have 3 or 4 captains elected like you do at most other schools, and he was it. So out of what? I'm not sure how many scholarship athletes they would have had there. It's an FCS team, not as many as an SEC team has, but at any rate, he was the captain. Good stuff there. It's kind of patchwork, though. They're moving people around to different positions. One might play left guard on one practice, and they might do some left tackle, and that's just kind of like some hokey pokey. I don't really like to hear that kind of stuff, but we've got to get better there on the line of scrimmage. So that running back position with Dakereon Joyner, Mario Anderson, who was a standout at Division II Newberry, who comes in, and freshman DJ Braswell. Now, Mario Anderson's story has not been written yet. Not a lot's been talked about him. But this guy rushed for over 1,500 yards at Newberry in each of the last 2 seasons. He was a stud there. Now, he's not going to be playing, though, behind an elite level SEC offensive line. He's going to be playing behind a mediocre one. So that kind of, it's kind of a pisser, I guess no other way to describe it. I would really like to see what he could do if we had an above average offensive line for him to play behind. It's kind of disheartening. However, I'm going to say this, and I'm not in any way trying to deflect from the fact that we don't have a good running game. Running backs have been getting devalued more and more in the NFL the past 10 years or so. Did you know that a shutdown corner is now more highly valued than a running back in the league? I didn't know that. It's kind of I don't want to say a dying position, but it's definitely a position that's changing. They don't have a real long shelf life in the NFL. Offenses in the NFL and in college have changed and will continue to change. These guys have to be able to set the edge. They're not going to get as many carries as they used to. And you do have to keep teams off balance, but teams continue to spread out their offenses more. And the running back is just kind of, I think, going to be a lost art going forward. South Carolina, of course, has a big commitment watch on the 23rd, which is Wednesday, from Daniel Hill, the 4-star running back out of Meridian, Mississippi. We're not going to turn this into a recruiting episode, but it's down to South Carolina and Alabama who this young man is going to choose. The guy is trending towards South Carolina. He's already stated that South Carolina is his favorite. His dad likes Bama. His dad would like to see him go to Alabama. However, the reports I'm getting and what I'm reading into it is that dad is not going to, or he's not the type of person who's going to pressure his son into doing something he doesn't want to do. Ultimately, the bag is going to come into effect here, and it's going to come into play. South Carolina can offer this guy immediate playing time. Alabama's got a true freshman coming in this year at running back who's going to be really, really good. His name escapes me right now. Daniel Hill would probably sit the bench behind this guy and God knows who else at Alabama. At South Carolina next year, Joyner's not going to be there. Mario Anderson will probably have moved on. Immediate playing time is something that would be very, very enticing to a kid who names a particular school his favorite. So, offensively, I think we've about exhausted all that. Defensively, South Carolina should be a solid unit again. We lose some pieces over there. Lost Zach Pickens to the NFL draft. Of course, Jordan Burch transferred out, went to Oregon, famously tried to come back to South Carolina. A lot of people know that. But either he was denied or something happened and he wasn't. It was not to be. He did not come back, which is a good thing. You don't want to get that kind of look. And quite frankly, he was not the kind of player that you would want to compromise your standards or your scruples over. Really underperformed most of his career at South Carolina. Was kind of coming on a little bit at the end of 2022, but good luck to him with the Ducks. South Carolina, has brought in some transfers over there on the defensive side of the ball, namely Jatius Gear, an edge rusher who comes from Syracuse. Jatius Greer is actually from Belton, South Carolina, played at BHP High School. It says he wanted to be a Gamecock. I don't really know why it wasn't pressed or why it wasn't wasn't recruited. He came in 2021. He was class of 2021, so that was probably some Will Muschamp garbage there. Probably didn't recruit the guy. Who knows? But he is a Gamecock now. Brings about 35 total tackles from last year, 3.5 sacks. At a Syracuse team that started off really hot and then kind of tailed off. They lost to Clemson, which gave them their first blemish, and they kind of went on a string of unimpressive performances, got blown out by Florida State, and really just didn't have the kind of season that it looked like they were going to have in early October. They bring back Mo Kaba, South Carolina's from injury, at the linebacker position, along with Grayson Pup Howard, who's a true freshman, who's going to see some playing time there. Stone Blanton is a redshirt freshman, I believe, and who should see a lot of playing time as well at the linebacker position. They also bring back Jordan Strawn, who was a really good player for South Carolina in 2021, a transfer from Georgia State from the previous year, tore his ACL last year against Arkansas, and missed the rest of the season. From what I'm seeing, he's back at full strength and running with the ones in practice. Mo Kaba wasn't really running with the ones, but it says that he is getting better each day. He also was lost to an ACL injury there in that game against Arkansas, so that was a loss on the road, and they really lost more than what they did on the scoreboard in that particular game. Hopefully these guys come back and just come back where they left off. They're both really good players, and Strawn is the pronunciation for Jordan's last name. If you're a Gamecock fan and you've got anybody that you don't really know, hey, how do I say that? How do I pronounce that? On our media guide, page 38, you can find a pronunciation guide. All you got to do is type in your Google machine, 2023 South Carolina Gamecocks media guide, and it gives you a breakdown of pronunciation for players whose names may be a little bit difficult for you or anyone else. They have always had this in the media guides, and I just kind of glossed over it, but nowadays it's even more relevant than ever before, because a lot of these guys have some funky names or some funky last names out there that a lot of us haven't seen before, don't know how to pronounce, and we want to sound and look intelligent when we are talking about these guys. So there it is, page 38. Throw it in your Google machine, Gamecocks Media Guide. All schools have one, a pronunciation guide, not a media guide. That's obvious that they do that. Did you know also that South Carolina has only started 9 true freshmen since 2009 and none since 2019? Some of the names on there that you would recognize, besides J.D. Clowney and Marcus Lattimore, Brian Edwards in 2016, J.C. Horn in 2018, and then Jamie Robinson in 2019, who ended up transferring to Mike Norvell's program as well. Looks like it's kind of a feeder program for him right now, isn't it? Special teams-wise, South Carolina should be very good. Again, they were rated in 2022 as Phil Steele's number 1 special teams unit. Blocked a handful of kicks last year, scored a touchdown on a fake punt. South Carolina has done really good at creating a positive turnover margin. Now, the thing about that is that success cannot always be replicated. But if you have a strong special teams coordinator like South Carolina does in Pete Limbo, more often than not, you're going to be more well-equipped to take advantages of those breaks and opportunities than you are if you don't. Well, that's something there to really look forward to. Miscellaneous notes on coaching. This is Beamer's third year, 15-11 as an overall record. Famously has the same record after 2 years at South Carolina that one Will Muschamp did. Of course, Clayton White comes in for his third year as the defensive coordinator. The aforementioned Pete Limbo, the special teams coordinator and assistant head coach, he comes back for his third year as well. They should really throw the checkbook at this guy and just lock him up. Don't allow him to leave. A key addition to the staff is Travian Robertson, the new interior defensive line coach. He comes from Tulane. He's a former Gamecock player, and I believe will be an upgrade from Jimmy Lindsey, who left the program back in the spring to join Brian Kelly's staff at LSU. If Brian Kelly had watched any of South Carolina's run defense last year, maybe he might, I don't know. But South Carolina on the interior part of the defensive line should be strong there with Tonka Hemingway, Alex Boogie Huntley, Elijah Davis is a guy who's coming over from junior college. We've got some nice pieces there. bringing in some freshmen as well who look to have some significant playing time. And on the back end of the defense, safety Nick Emenwari, DQ Smith, both these guys last year played a lot as freshmen. Of course, Nick Emenwari was a true freshman out of Irmo High School, really not highly regarded or really highly recruited, ended up leading the team in tackles, had just an absolute great year. Hopefully we don't see a sophomore slump out of him. DQ Smith also had a really good year, returned an interception for a touchdown against Notre Dame in the bowl game. And I famously, during that live stream, was a little bit under the influence of some of these and was cheering for Nick Emenwari as he took the pick six back for a touchdown. And it was DQ Smith. Or it may have been a fumble six. It was a something six. We scored off of it. At the corners, Marcellus Dial is a young man who's out of Woodruff, South Carolina, just over the way. O'Donnell Fortune will also lock up one of those spots. He returned an interception 100 yards in the bowl game against Notre Dame for a pick six, too. And I'm spilling off all these stats against Notre Dame in the bowl game, and you'd think, my God, y'all must have won that thing by 40. No, South Carolina actually lost 45-38. But the significance of that bowl game is, South Carolina played well in that game, especially in the first half. In the second half, there were some depth issues, and Notre Dame's running game, especially with quarterback Tyler Buckner, kind of took over there, which Alabama fans, I think you're kind of lucky to have this guy. He looked like a pretty good quarterback to me running the football against South Carolina, but that's just me. He gave us a fit. The thing about that bowl game is that roster you saw in that game is pretty much who you're going to have playing in the 2023 season, with the addition of some transfer portal guys and the addition of some freshmen. That's a lot of your roster makeup. And for the most intensive purposes, South Carolina played pretty well in that game. Like I say, depth issues. You had a lot of opt-outs, and the guys who hit the transfer portal were gone by then. Things could definitely be worse. They definitely could be worse. So let's get. I didn't mention punter Kai Kroger. Excellent job last year by this young man, as well as the place kicker Mitch Jeter. Kind of stepped in the big shoes of Parker White, who'd been a Gamecock for, it seemed like, forever. And all Mitch Jeter did was just go out and be perfect. You couldn't have asked for more out of a freshman. So that facet of South Carolina's game will be strong this coming year as well. The return guys really hadn't been named as yet, and that could change as well too. So that's about all I've got on the roster, where it's going, where it's been, and where I think it's at right now. Let's talk about the 2023 schedule. I'm going to throw it up on the board behind me, and we're going to go down through this schedule, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for each one of these games, and I'm going to tell you why. All right, South Carolina starts off on September 2nd, a neutral site game in Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte, the Dukes Mayo Kickoff Classic against the North Carolina Tar Heels. Border War game. These two teams last met in the 2021 Dukes Mayo Bowl in the same stadium. South Carolina coming out on top in that contest, in which they were a double-digit underdog. Of course, a lot of it's been made of North Carolina and signal caller Drake May. This guy threw for over 4,000 yards last year, 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Just a really good player. What kind of concerns me a little bit more from a Gamecock perspective is the running ability of Drake May. South Carolina has not fared real well against quarterbacks who can run around a little bit, and Drake May can do that. He's lost his top two receivers in Josh Downs and Antoine Green, who was about 1,800 yards worth of the receptions on the balls that he threw from last year. They do return 9 starters on offense altogether, and that offensive line returns pretty much intact. However, this is an offensive line last year that gave up 40 sacks. That's not good. And defensively, much has been made of that defense as well. It's just not very good. So if you return 8 starters on it, are you really returning anything? They bring back the same defensive coordinator in Gene Chizik. Of course, Gene Chizik took Auburn to the national championship back in 2010. They bring in a new offensive coordinator in Coach Lindsey, Chip Lindsey from his stop he had was a head coach at Troy, which kind of gave South Carolina a fit a couple of years ago under his tutelage. He's going to be the OC. They're going to run the ball a little bit more under Chip Lindsey than what they did under outgoing offensive coordinator Phil Longo, who went to Wisconsin to join Luke Fickell's staff. This, to me, it seems like North Carolina's favored in this game by about 2.5 points. Much has been made of Drake May. Excuse me. I think North Carolina has this number 20 national ranking right now solely based on Drake May and not the pieces around him. I don't think the pieces around him are that good. I think South Carolina is going to be the more physical team in this matchup. I've kind of went back and forth on it too, though, because South Carolina, although, O'Donnell Fortune and Marcellus Dial and that are good players, they're still a little bit untested, as well as some of the other pieces in the back end of that secondary. But I think with the additions of Gear and then Jordan Strawn up front coming back at full strength, I think they're going to be able to get a decent pass rush off on him. I think South Carolina may force him into some uncharacteristic mistakes. And I think that South Carolina wins this game. I think it's going to be a high-scoring affair. I wouldn't put it past Spencer Rattler to throw one, maybe 2 interceptions. I also wouldn't put it past him to throw maybe 4 touchdowns. I think you're looking at a 38-35 type game, a 35-31 type ball game, a ball game that could hit the over on the points total. And South Carolina goes 1-0 on the season. I think that we beat North Carolina in Charlotte to open the season up. Next week, you come home, take on the Furman Paladins. Furman's going to come into this game off 2 days extra rest. They'll actually open their season on that Thursday night, August 31st, against Tennessee Tech. This is not a team to be taken lightly. They are FCS. They're favored to win the Southern Conference this year. They are deep at running back, led by a young man named Dominic Roberto, 1,120 yards and 11 touchdowns last year. They also had the number 1 scoring defense in the Southern Conference, made it to the second round of the playoffs. They beat Elon in the first round. In the second round, they were ousted by Incarnate Word. Furman is going to give South Carolina a little bit of a fit, at least for the first half of this ball game. Mark my words. South Carolina will pull away in the second half. Just superior depth and talent on both sides of the ball is going to prevail. But you go 2-0 in this game, but not without a little bit of a test from the Paladins from here in the Greenville, South Carolina area. Third game of the season, you're on the road at Georgia. I think you drop this one. I think you drop your first game. Right now, they're a 20-something point favorite over South Carolina. I think that after South Carolina starts off 2-0, that we may go in about a 17-point underdog against them. We just don't match up on either side of the ball, as will a lot of teams this year. It's not that Georgia cannot be beaten, though. We've seen last year they were pressed by the Missouri Tigers, just maybe 1 or 2 players short from being able to knock off Georgia in that game. In the national championship semifinal game, if Noah Ruggles' kick goes through the uprights, Georgia's done. And Ohio State would have ended up being your eventual national champion. So it can happen. South Carolina, however, is just not equipped to do it. I think that this ball game will definitely be more competitive than what the one was in Columbia last year, in which South Carolina just got blown out 48-7 in a game that Kirby Smart could have scored 90 to 100 points if he had wanted to. If you had watched that game on TV or remember any parts of it, and you will definitely agree with me and bear that out. I think South Carolina loses this one somewhere in the 38-14 range, maybe the 38-17 range. I don't think Georgia scores as much as they did last year, and I think South Carolina puts a little bit more up, but maybe puts up a fight for the first half, but eventually UGA is just going to overwhelm them. I'm not going to overtalk that one anymore. We move on to the next week. South Carolina is taking on Mississippi State at home. This is a virtual unknown. Zach Arnett is going to go away from that Mike Leach type offense. The run and shoot, fun and gun, whatever you want to call that thing, to like a more pro style, more balanced attack. Will Rogers will return as quarterback, and they also will return Jarquavius Marks, a running back who rushed for about 600 yards last year. And this is the kind of guy that I can see having a big day against South Carolina. Just someone that comes in that you really don't have a good radar on. Mississippi State has a talented roster. I think South Carolina finds a way to win this game. I think it's a close one. I think it's too close for comfort. Mississippi State, actually, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that they're going to play LSU the week before that. They may come into this one a little bit out of sorts. I think they'll probably come off of a loss to LSU. And I think we'll drop them at home. But that one's not going to be easy either. Fifth game of the season, on the road at Tennessee. This is on September 30th. We'll be in Neyland Stadium. Don't know if it's a night game yet or be a noon kickoff as it was a couple of years ago, a game when South Carolina got blown out. Of course, Tennessee had an excellent season last year, finished up 11-2. Josh Heupel has really seemingly turning things there around, coming off of, and I joke a lot on Tennessee. I poke a lot of fun at them. I especially poke a lot at them after we beat them 63-38 last year in a game where things were never really in doubt. After the first quarter, South Carolina just absolutely laid the hammer to them. It came from out of nowhere. No one saw it coming. Tennessee just had no answer for Spencer Rattler in that game. Now this year, they look to right the ship. A lot of the salty Tennessee fans made a lot of excuses after that game last year, said things like, well, our offense and our defense were fighting each other in the locker room because Hendon Hooker got a big NIL deal from Mercedes, and Jeremy Banks, the middle linebacker, was pissed off about it. And, South Carolina dumped sand on the field to slow down Jalen Hyatt before the game, and just all kind of ridiculous stuff. It just made absolutely no sense. Look, if you're that good of a team, infighting amongst your players should not affect your performance like that on the field. And if it does, then I would question Josh Heupel's crisis management skills because they're not very good if that, in fact, led to your downfall that night. Tennessee fans have been running around on the internet all offseason touting how they're going to beat South Carolina by 50 points. It's not going to be close. If Josh Heupel can score 100, he will. None of these things are going to happen. None of these things are going to happen. This will be a competitive ball game. I expect South Carolina to come into this one and play well. Tennessee also is at the disadvantage of the week before, having to play a game against UTSA. The casual football fan doesn't know about UTSA. The Roadrunners, coached by Jeff Traylor, run up and down the field. This is a very high-scoring team. Was in Conference USA, I believe, for a number of years. I think they've moved to the American with the moves of Houston and UCF to the Big 12 and Cincinnati. It kind of created some spots in the American Conference, which UTSA is a member of now, I believe. That's going to be a tough ball game for Tennessee, and it's going to test them a little bit. This is a good spot for South Carolina to have them situation-wise, if you're talking that. However, and I always look at who teams are playing the week before, if they've got an off day, or what have you, what they've got going on. That's a good spot for them to be. What's that idiot doing? However, I don't think this is an overall good spot for the Gamecocks. Tennessee still returns a ton of talent on the offense that really didn't get a chance to shine a lot last year. They've got a good stable of running backs there. Jabari Smalls, Jalen Wright, these guys are really good. I think Tennessee wins this game. I think you're probably looking at another one where in the first half the game may be a little close. In the second half, may get away from South Carolina a little bit. Obviously, don't know what the line will be in this ball game as yet. I think Tennessee will probably cover whatever it is, which will spoil an otherwise pretty good performance by the Gamecocks. Just what I'm seeing from right now. Of course, things could change between now and then. But on the next week, you're off. You're going to need an off week there. It comes kind of earlier in the season than usual. Normally they come a little bit later, maybe 2 games later. But you're off, then you'll return to action on October 14th at home against Florida. Of course, South Carolina lost to Florida 38-6 last year. Not a lot of people are high on the Gators this year. I think their Vegas over-under win total is 5.5. Billy Napier, though, has been recruiting really well. So Florida is just a program that's just very confusing to figure out right now. They bring in Graham Mertz at quarterback, a transfer portal kid who comes in from Wisconsin. He's kind of, got shuffled out during the whole changeover to the Luke Fickell regime and that mix. Not a real effective quarterback at Wisconsin. He threw almost as many interceptions as he did touchdowns. But Wisconsin is a ground and pound team which runs a totally different style of offense than most teams do. Florida has a good stable of running backs there, like Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne, that South Carolina had no answer for last year. I'm going to go on ahead and give South Carolina the win here. I just think that they're just going to be really unbalanced. In that Florida's just really going to be able to do nothing but run the football. And South Carolina's run defense, while I don't think it's going to be upper echelon SEC level, I think that unit is going to be improved this year and will force Graham Mertz to throw the ball around some, which it's not going to be what he's comfortable doing. And I think South Carolina is going to get a win here. This may be kind of a difficult year for Florida. We'll know more after that Utah game there on that Thursday night on August 31st. But I think South Carolina gets the win coming off the bye week against Florida. I think you may see kind of an ugly game here, a 2017 type game, a 24-17 type game, but I think South Carolina picks up the win at home against the Gators and improves to 4-2 going into a game on the road at Missouri. And this actually is a 3-game stretch here of games coming out of the bye week against Florida, at Mizzou, and at A&M. This is where the season's kind of going to be defined a little bit. You cannot afford to go 0-3 there and drop all 3 of those games. They do go on the road to take on Missouri the next week in Columbia, Como. Missouri is at Kentucky the week prior. This one's I have a certain way I want to pick this game, but I'm trying to be objective with this, and you need to pick games with your head, not your heart. South Carolina has lost 4 games in a row to Mizzou, 19, 20, 4 games in a row to Mizzou. And honestly, I don't think they're going to be that much improved over last year, them being Mizzou, pronouns, pal. Eli Drinkowitz has just kind of been status quo. He's had some really piss-poor offenses at Mizzou, and he's an offensive guy. He's recruited really well, as evidenced by he brought in, a kid just the other day, Williams Nwarney. His name escapes me a little bit there at edge rusher. NIL had a lot to do with that. But he's brought in the last or the year before last cycle there, Luther Burden, 5-star kid out of the St. Louis area, and have picked up some other good pieces. Offensively, they're challenged. Brady Cook is just a so-so quarterback. He's not real flashy. He did enough last year to get Mizzou a pretty easy win against South Carolina. We didn't have an answer for him there. This is a road game, and I'm going to have to chalk this one up as a loss. I think you drop this game to Mizzou. You know, a lot has been made. South Carolina fans kind of looking down on Mizzou. And the same thing with a lot of the Arkansas fans. They look down on Mizzou as well. Like, we're better than them. They just beat us every year. Looking at the two programs, you know, Mizzou last year, South Carolina was not, you weren't better than them. And, you know, you weren't better than them in 2021 when they beat you up. Now, looking back at some of those other games in 2019, we lost to them. I would say Mizzou was better then. South Carolina was, you know, it was an injured Jake Bentley. You went on the road, and that was just a bad 2020. That was the first game after Muschamp had gotten fired. You had several players who just quit the team when that happened. But, you know, 2021, 22, the two under Shane Beamer, you know, I wouldn't say you were better than Missouri. They had a better game plan than we did, and they executed it, and they beat us. They're at Kentucky the week prior, so that could be a really physical ball game for them. That will be a physical ball game for them, and you know, I don't think this thing necessarily regresses back to the mean here. I'm gonna give this a loss until they can show me that they're going to beat them. So that's 4-3 there. The bad news is your record evens up at 4-4 after that. Go on the road to Texas A&M the next week. This is not a good spot for South Carolina. They're 8-1 all time against us. The Aggies are 4-0 in College Station. They're actually off the week prior. They've got 10 starters returning on offense, 10 on defense. They were 5-7 last year. The record, you know, was a little bit misleading. There was a game against Alabama there where A&M could have won that ball game. You know, you dropped a crazy game to Appalachian State. Who knows what the heck happened in that one? They beat the SEC West champs in LSU, which was the game at the end of the season. LSU had the SEC West all sewed up, so they went out there and really just didn't perform against A&M, which is kind of a, you know, that's not, that's just a mark of just being kind of undisciplined, I think, and being and lack of focus. But 10 out of 10 returns returning. They bring back Anaya Smith and on the outside there, and other young man whose name I have written down here, and I can't read my own chicken scratch. But I think South Carolina drops this game to A&M. They're expected to be the most improved team in the country this year in a lot of places, and I think they're going to have a really good year. I could see them winning 9 ball games, going 9-3 or so, and we drop that one on the road. Jacksonville State at home the next week. That is the matchup of the Gamecocks. This one was kind of a weird game. South Carolina was scheduled to play Liberty here, and something happened with that one. Liberty joined Conference USA, so we had to get a different opponent. It ended up being Jacksonville State, but guess what? Jacksonville State's in Conference USA too. So I don't know what happened there, but we are playing the Gamecocks. This is their first year in FBS. They returned 16 starters too from a team that went 9-2 last year under Rich Rodriguez. It's kind of hard to get a balance on just what they exactly can be. Sam Houston State is another team that moved up to FBS from FCS from last year, that's won a FCS championship, and Jacksonville State actually knocked them off last year. This is another Furman-type game. They've got a quarterback who can do a lot with his legs. He can do some stuff through the air as well. I think it's another Furman-type game where you get kind of pressed in the first half and things are a little bit too close for comfort. But South Carolina pulls away in the second half. You're 5-4. Return home the next week, and the rest of these games are at home. So we didn't say return home. And return home. I just did it, didn't I? Vanderbilt the next week at home. I have nothing here but to say that I think the Gamecocks will win this game. Vanderbilt last year won 2 conference games. Benefited greatly from miscues from the other teams, those being Kentucky and Florida. However, they were wins by Vanderbilt, gave them some upward trajectory. This year, I think that things kind of regress for them a little bit. SEC teams will be kind of on the lookout that, hey, Vandy's not what they once were. And I think it's very likely that they don't win a conference game this year and end up going 3-9. A lot of people are predicting them to go 4-0 in their non-con with a win against Wake Forest. They're not beating Wake Forest at home or on the road. They're just too good for them. People need to stop with that noise. Clark Lee, I think, is a good coach. He has things headed in the right direction. And with some more solid recruiting, I think could potentially, maybe end up in a bowl game in a couple of years. It's not going to be next year or this year, though. They do return at quarterback A.J. Swan, the sophomore, kind of supplanted Ken Seals, who was the quarterback there previous. They are still on the roster. They do lose running back in Ray Davis. To Kentucky. He jumped in the transfer portal, went to Kentucky. 1,042 yards and 5 touchdowns last year. Kind of amazing. A guy went for only 1,000 something yards and only scored 5 TDs. But he's moved on to Kentucky, where he'll play behind a better offensive line. Maybe his numbers will jump a little bit there. That's a huge loss for Vanderbilt. So that's a big hole they're going to have to fill. They come into this one after a home game against Auburn, who looks to have kind of a rebuilding year under Hugh Freeze. Maybe Vanderbilt upsets Auburn. I don't think that's going to happen, but it could. And if they're riding a high there, who knows? South Carolina is going to eventually lose a game to Vanderbilt. We've beaten them every year, starting in 2009 up until the present. It's just not going to be in Columbia, though. I think we're too much for them on that evening. So we're sitting here at 6-4 and kind of in the same spot we were last year. What do? Do we take these last 2 games against Kentucky and Clemson and finish up 8-4 again, or do we drop something here and not? The Kentucky game is going to be another tough physical matchup. Kentucky had kind of an anomaly last year under Mark Stoops in that they had a really poor offensive line. Still, however, Chris Rodriguez, who came back after Game 4, and he was suspended for the first 4 games of the year for drinking tequila on Mother's Day 2022 and driving around and getting arrested. Offensive line is going to be improved this year. They've added some transfer portal pieces, and they also bring in new old offensive coordinator Liam Cohen, who was actually a guy who spent some time in the NFL. He was the coordinator there in 2021. Well, they put a lot of points up on the board, and Will Levis kind of built himself up a reputation as being a really good quarterback who was kind of thrown away by Penn State. And then he regressed a lot in 2022 under Rich Scangarello. As OC, Scangarello is out. Cohen is back in. They have some good pieces on the outside, and Barryon Brown and Dane Key. Both these guys were freshmen last year. Their defense is going to be solid once again, as it always is under Mark Stoops. And, of course, I mentioned the addition of Ray Davis, who looks to take Rodriguez's place as the starter at running back for Kentucky, which is always a key cog in their offensive wheel. I think we drop this game. I didn't mention, of course, they also bring in transfer portal quarterback Devin Leary from NC State, who was there for several years. Did some really good things, was injured a lot of 2022. If they get things going like I think that they will with Leary and those wide receivers, Kentucky's going to have a really good year. I could see them winning 8 or 9 ball games. Given that, just the coaching ability of Mark Stoops and the just the overall history against Kentucky not being great. Of course, South Carolina did beat them last year in Lexington, and that was a big win. I think Kentucky gets us at home this year. I think it's going to be a really raucous environment. And they've come into Williams-Brice several times in some really raucous environments under Mark Stoops, and they've gotten a win. 2015 and 2019 are a couple of games that come to mind. Or 2017, excuse me. Of course, that's where under Will Muschamp. 2021, they beat South Carolina 16-10. In Williams-Brice, and a game that South Carolina kind of had circled. We thought we were going to kind of supplant some stuff there under Shane Beamer, and Soup said, no, not so fast. I think this is kind of a lower scoring physical matchup, and it just favors Kentucky. I hate to say that, but once again, I'm making predictions with my head here, not my heart, and that's what I see that one going at 6-5 there after that game. And then the next week is the game against Clemson. I don't know what Clemson's going to be coming into this one. They could be undefeated. I personally think they're going to have a couple of losses. I have them losing that game week 1 against Duke, and I don't think that's a silly pick. A lot of people are running around the internet talking about how can Carolina jackpot bet Pigskin Pete that Clemson's going to lose to Duke. Well, it's a road game. Duke has a really good offense. They return most of their players. They're really well coached. They were 9-4 last year. Maybe some of those things might kind of come into play. You're kind of a little bit of an unknown. You got a new offensive coordinator, which we'll talk about there as Garrett Riley comes in after a year at TCU where he won the, whatever the name of the award is, for the best assistant coach in the country. Of course, Dabo just kind of comes out of nowhere and hires him as offensive coordinator. I have to think that was in the works before the national championship game, which Riley coached TCU to a 65-7 loss to the Georgia Bulldogs. And that's kind of, that's what has me kind of shaking my head about him a little bit is, how did you only put up 7 points on Georgia if you're just this really great offensive coordinator? You beat Texas. They didn't win their conference championship, actually. Kansas State did. But you did all these great things. You're only able to score 7 points. And, I know it was UGA, and they were just absolutely on that night. They'd been in the national championship picture before, won it one time, finished as runner-up one time, of course, to Alabama in 2017. But 7 points, and then that 7 points came on a little short drive after a busted play by Georgia's defense, or you would have gotten shut out. So I'm kind of up in the air about that. Cade Klubnik has a lot of talent. I think the guy's going to be really good. I think he will make a huge jump this year. Clemson's got to find some weapons on the outside. Of course, they do have Antonio Williams coming back there. Bo Collins, Adam Randall are some guys' names that come to mind there. Of course, Jake Brenningstool is a good weapon for them at tight end. They have Will Shipley in the backfield along with Phil Maffa, and these guys are dangerous. I don't think we win this game. I'm going to go on ahead and give this one to Clemson. I think it'll be a good game. I think it'll be a competitive, physical game. I don't think you're going to see any 30-0 shutouts in this one. But I just think that there's just going to be a little bit more depth there on the Clemson side of the ball. And now, last year's win was great. But we may be entering a kind of an era in this Clemson-Carolina series, and you've seen this happen before. It happened a lot back in the 90s where the visiting team plays better than they do when they're at home. South Carolina won like 3 games in a row in that series at Clemson back in the 90s, and Clemson then returned the favor in Columbia on the opposite years. I could see something like that happening. South Carolina is just a year or two away from being able to compete with a Clemson legitimately year in, year out. Last year's come from behind win was great, but let's not act like they didn't help us a little bit along the way. So I think we dropped that game. I think it's a close ball game. It could be a touchdown or less, which is great because a lot of these games have been blowouts in the past 10 years, most of them in their favor. We want to see that ship righted. Unfortunately, I just don't think we're going to be able to quite pull that one off in Columbia on that last Saturday in November. And I think we finish up at 6-6, planting the seeds for, I think, what's going to be a really good 2024 season. This is a scenario where South Carolina could have a worse record this year, which is what I'm predicting. I think Las Vegas got it right. And it still could be a better overall team, building some strengths there. I think Rattler's going to have some good numbers. I think he's going to throw some interceptions. If you had to put, if you had to put my reputation on the line, I would say that his QBR and his touchdown to interception ratio improves over last year, but I still don't think it's going to end up where you want to be as far as elite status or where you're going to be able to pull some of these ball games out. And some of these may swing in our favor. We could win the game at Missouri if we execute a solid game plan, I feel like. I certainly think Kentucky is a winnable game. But then you look on the flip side, that game against Mississippi State scares the absolute bejesus out of Carolina Jackpot because you just don't know what you're going to get from them. The North Carolina game in 2 weeks scares me too. They're certainly capable of beating us. I don't put a lot into revenge. I think revenge is overrated, and the Las Vegas people will tell you revenge is overrated as well. But they are going to be looking for revenge against South Carolina for that beatdown in the Duke's Mayo Bowl a couple of seasons ago. I know Mack Brown would like to get that win back. Mack Brown, not Mike Brown. So that's a losable game. Florida game at home is a losable game. That's why I'm telling you, there is a scenario here where the bottom could drop out, and you could win like 3 or 4 ball games. But there's also a scenario, and there's a path to 8 or 9 wins. It just all lies in the execution and how quickly some of these unknown pieces, some of these young pieces, the Nick Harbors, the Pup Howards, how fast these guys are, the Trey Knoxes, the transfer pieces, how well they adapt to South Carolina and how much of a part they play in the fabric of what promises to be an exciting 2023 college football season. So there you have it, gang. 6-6. That's what I'm coming up with. I've slept on it. I've crunched it, and this is what I keep coming back to. So I know it's disappointing to the Gamecock fans out there. I know it's not what you want to hear, but bear in mind, my prediction is just that. It's my prediction. This does not mean this is how the season is going to go. I think I need to put that out there as a disclaimer, and I probably should have put that out at the beginning of the video. This is not necessarily how we're going to end the season up. This is just looking at it through Carolina Jackpot's normally glass half empty. And I've told you I look at things that way a lot because it makes you not as disappointed. When things don't go your way, I'm still just, even though I think the defense and the front seven, I think the defensive line will be better under Travian Robertson. I'm not totally sold on it, to where I'd be able to put money on it. And I'm just really concerned about the offensive line, and them being able to do the things they need to do for Spencer Rattler to be as effective as he needs to be. So that's where I come back at, guys. 6-6. I hope for better. I definitely pray that it's not any worse. I'll see you guys later on. Please, as I said earlier, hit this with a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. There's also going to be a link down below to the Callaway's College Football Pick'em Challenge. You've got 2 more weeks left to enter it, but you really need to try to get in before those games on that that Saturday, August 26th, which is next Saturday, so that you'll be able to pick those 7 games and have the best shot at winning the big pot at the end of the season. So I'll see you guys later. Peace, and I'm out of here. Go Gamecocks, and go Coach Beamer. Woo!